The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with golden light, but that light carried no warmth, no kindness, no unity anymore. It felt cold, like the light of a dying star, like something that had once meant hope but now only exposed betrayal. Banners from every species hung on the towering walls, each one meant to represent peace and alliance. But tonight, those banners were nothing more than decorations in a theater where betrayal would be the main act. The air inside the chamber was thick and heavy, a silence so sharp it felt like it could cut skin, the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible happens. The human delegation stood at the center, a small group surrounded by hundreds of alien representatives, towering, whispering, waiting like vultures circling their prey. Humanity had stood here many times before, negotiating, leading, protecting, but this night was different. The supreme speaker of the council, a tall being with silver-blue skin and crystal eyes, stepped forward, its voice calm and smooth like a blade dipped in honey. "This council has reached a decision," it said, and its words echoed through the chamber like a slow thunder. Every eye turned toward the humans, every light from the hovering drones focused on their faces. The lead human ambassador stood tall, jaw tight, shoulders squared, knowing what was coming but refusing to bow. "Access revoked. Humanity will be removed." The words fell like stones into deep water. There was no discussion, no vote. The decision had been made long before the humans entered this room. For a brief heartbeat, the chamber was still. Not a sound, not a breath. Then the whispers started like cracks spreading through glass. Alien delegates turned to one another, some whispering with satisfaction, others with unease, but none of them spoke in defense. None stood with the humans, the supposed allies, species that humanity had bled to protect in wars past. Looked away, their heads lowered not out of guilt but out of convenience. It was easier to be silent, easier to let humanity burn alone. The alien banners swayed gently in the recycled air, and to the humans, it felt like the whole chamber was mocking them. One of the human envoys clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Not a single human shouted, not a single human begged. But their silence was louder than any protest could ever be. It made the aliens uncomfortable, because deep down even they knew humans never stayed down for long. The supreme speaker continued, its voice wrapped in political lies. "This decision was made for the balance of the galaxy. Humanity has become unpredictable, unstable, dangerous. It is for the good of all." A wave of agreement swept through the chamber, a disgusting chorus of fake unity. The lead human took a step forward, his boots echoing against the marble floor, his eyes locked on the speaker. 4 years, humanity had been the council's sword and shield. They had fought in wars the other races were too afraid to fight. They had built trade routes, rescued colonies, sacrificed soldiers on worlds that weren't even their own. But none of that mattered now. Not the blood spilled, not the alliances signed, not the history shared. The aliens saw humanity not as allies anymore, but as a threat they thought they could control, a threat they thought they could erase. Around the chamber, screens flashed the official order, words written in the alien language of the council, but burned into the human's memory like a scar. Access revoked, territory reduced, council membership terminated. The words glowed cold white against the walls. It was more than an expulsion. It was an erasure of trust, a public humiliation meant to break their spirit. Some alien delegates even smiled. They thought they were watching the end of a dangerous rival. A soft laugh came from one of the delegates of a reptilian empire, low but sharp enough for the humans to hear, and that laugh spread like a sickness. Another chuckled. Then another. To them, this was just politics, just another power play. But for humanity, it was the spark that would change everything. The lead human looked around the chamber slowly, letting his gaze fall on every banner, every face, every smug smirk. He didn't speak a single word, but that silence, calm, heavy, controlled, made the laughter stop. The supreme speaker tilted its head, confused, expecting outrage, begging, or threats. But humanity offered none. One of the younger delegates beside the speaker leaned over and whispered, "Why aren't they saying anything?" But the speaker didn't answer. It stared into the human's cold, steady eyes and felt something it hadn't felt in a long time: unease. The humans didn't look like the defeated. They looked like the quiet before a storm. The lead human reached into his coat and placed a small metallic seal on the marble floor. It was the seal of Earth's membership, an honor they once carried with pride. He let it rest there, in the middle of the golden circle of power, like a blade left behind in enemy territory. He didn't bow. He didn't salute. He just turned and began to walk toward the massive chamber doors. His steps echoed slowly, a sound that cut through the fake noise of the council like thunder through fog. The rest of the human delegation followed him in perfect silence, shoulders straight, heads high, like soldiers walking away from a battlefield. Not because they lost, but because they were choosing a different war. The Supreme Speaker raised its voice, trying to sound dominant. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be. This decision is final. Humanity will accept its place." But the humans didn't even look back. That was what unsettled them most. Not rebellion, not resistance, just silence. Silent promises, silent rage, silent preparation. The moment the massive steel doors closed behind the human delegation, the chamber erupted into noise. Alien diplomats shouted, laughed, argued. Some feared what might come. Others celebrated what they thought was their victory. A delegate from a thin, insectoid race hissed, "They'll fade in the dark. No race survives alone outside the core." A feline alien laughed. "Humans are strong in words, weak in war. This is the end of them." And through it all, the Supreme Speaker remained quiet, because deep down, even it wasn't convinced. Outside the chamber, in the dark marble hallway, the humans stopped walking. No cameras, no council ears. Just the sound of their breaths. One of them, a young officer with fire in his eyes, spoke in a low, controlled voice. "They think we're finished." The lead delegate turned slightly, his face calm, unreadable. "Good," he said. "Let them think that." Another asked softly, "What do we do now?" The leader's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every soldier, every scientist, every soul on Earth. "We do what humans have always done," he said. "We build, we wait, and when the time comes, we answer." Far above the council world, in the dark silence of space, the human flagship waited. It wasn't armed for war yet. It didn't need to be. It carried something stronger than weapons. It carried purpose. The stars outside were cold, distant, endless. And somewhere in that darkness, plans were already in motion. The betrayal hadn't broken humanity. It had awakened something ancient, something dangerous, something the galaxy had forgotten. Back in the chamber, the Supreme Speaker stared at the empty space where the humans once stood and felt a chill crawl up its spine. Because even though they had stripped humanity of power on paper, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made the greatest mistake in the history of the galaxy. The silence humanity left behind wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a storm that had not yet arrived. And when that storm came, no banner, no treaty, no empire would be able to stop it. The stars outside the council world burned cold and distant as the human fleet drifted through the darkness, engines silent, lights dimmed, a shadow disappearing into the void. The council believed it had stripped humanity of power, believed it had pushed them out to fade like a dying ember. But they didn't know what burned inside those silent ships. They didn't know the way humans carried rage. Not loud, not reckless, but buried deep like fire beneath ice. Waiting, building, growing. No alarms sounded as the human flagship passed the outer relay stations. No protests rose from alien ships. No fleets followed. Because the galaxy thought humanity was leaving in shame, walking away defeated. But this wasn't retreat. It was the first move of a game only humanity knew they were playing. Inside the flagship, the air was cold, steady, heavy with purpose. Soldiers and engineers moved through steel corridors with quiet precision. No panic, no fear, just focus. Their eyes calm, their hands fast. Commanders gathered in the central chamber where a single holographic map showed the galactic spiral, and one by one, sectors of space lit up in red. Hidden places unknown to the Council, old mining systems abandoned after the first expansion, asteroid fields rich in or in silence, black zones where no alien dared to travel. These were the places humanity had claimed long ago in secret, not for war, not for conquest, but for survival. Now, those forgotten shadows would become their greatest weapon. The lead admiral stood at the center of the war room, her voice calm, low and cold. "The Council thinks we're done," she said, her fingers brushing over the glowing sectors. "They think exile is punishment, but they've just handed us freedom." Around her, the officers didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Their silence was iron, unshakable. "They're blind," one officer said, leaning over the map. "They don't know what we've been building for the last 40 years out there." Another added, "They think we depended on their fleets. They have no idea we built our own." The human fleet split into formations as it entered the dark sectors, their movements silent, synchronized, like blades cutting through black water. No broadcast signals, no open communications, just encrypted bursts bouncing through secure relays, bouncing like heartbeats between ships that had no names anymore, only code names, only missions. On the surface of a frozen moon in Sector 9, lights began to glow beneath the ice as hidden shipyards powered up for the first time in years. Massive construction arms emerged like metal beasts waking from long hibernation. Ancient hulls, forgotten by the galaxy, began to shake off their dust. In a cavern carved into an asteroid belt, soldiers trained in silence, their boots hitting the steel floors in perfect rhythm, the sound echoing like a pulse of war waiting to be unleashed. The Council believed humanity was weak because they didn't see this, because humans had been smart enough to never show everything they had. They had learned that trust was fragile, that power was always temporary, that the galaxy respected only strength. And now, stripped of politics and alliances, humanity was finally free to become something the Council could not control. Messages spread through hidden channels, quiet as whispers, reaching every human colony, every outpost, every station, from Mars to Titan to the deep mining rings of the outer fringe. "We are no longer part of the Council," the transmission said, a calm human voice carrying through the void. "They cast us out. Let them believe we are broken. But this is not the end. This is the beginning." And in every corner of human space, people who had once lived under Council law lifted their heads higher, because Betrayal had done something the Council never expected. It had united them completely. Inside a dark command room on the flagship, the lead admiral stood alone for a moment, watching the stars, her hands clasped behind her back, her breath slow, controlled. She remembered standing in the Council chamber, listening to the verdict, watching their allies look away. She remembered the silence. And now that silence had become her weapon. "Let them laugh," she whispered to herself. "Let them think we're gone. By the time they realize what we've built, it will be too late." Back in the Council core, alien leaders celebrated quietly, convinced the threat was over. They believed they had won without firing a shot. But far away in the frozen black, the pulse of human engines grew stronger. Old dreadnoughts came online with deep mechanical roars, stations powered up. Hidden factories began producing weapons designed not for diplomacy but for war. Plans stored in classified archives were opened for the first time. Strategic commands that had been nothing more than whispers in secret military halls turned into active orders. The galaxy didn't see the convoys moving through dark space. It didn't hear the war machines breathing under the surface. It didn't know that humanity in exile had just removed the last chain from its neck. And as the last human ship vanished beyond the Council's borders, one message burned into every encrypted channel. "They betrayed us. We remember." The quiet in the dark was not surrender. It was the beginning of a storm no one could stop. The galaxy whispered without knowing what it was whispering about, fear spreading in small, quiet ways like smoke through cracks in a wall. Alien merchants traded rumors in backwater stations about human fleets appearing where no routes existed. Scouts reported flashes in deep sectors, ships moving without transponders, shadows that passed between the stars. But when the Council demanded proof, nothing solid ever came back, just fragments, static stories. They dismissed it as desperation, as humanity trying to cling to relevance. They thought humans were scattered, broken, licking their wounds in silence. They didn't understand that silence was the warning. In the dark edges of forgotten space, hidden listening posts belonging to old empires caught strange transmissions. Heartbeat pulses, short, encrypted, repeating in perfect rhythm, always the same. One signal, then silence. Council analysts tried to decode it but failed again and again. It wasn't alien, it wasn't random, it was human, and it wasn't begging to return. It was counting down. One alien scout ship returned from the border between the Council sectors and the empty void that used to be shared territory with Earth. The crew was shaking. Their reports fragmented. Their recordings filled with strange echoes of engines larger than anything they'd ever heard. They described silhouettes in the dark, colossal warships moving with terrifying precision, not drifting like pirates, but gliding like predators that owned the night. The report was dismissed by Council leadership, called exaggerated. But the recording spread quietly through military channels, and those who listened to it in the dark felt something they hadn't felt in years when thinking of humanity: fear. The Council tried to move on. They signed new treaties with other species, expanded trade, held meetings in the same golden chamber where they had betrayed humanity. They told themselves it was over. But it wasn't over. It was too quiet, too controlled. The kind of quiet that meant something massive was moving beneath the surface. One senator from the Vrak Dominion said it best during a private meeting: "Humans don't shout when they bleed. They build when they bleed." His words were ignored. Meanwhile, in the void, human fleets moved like shadows across the map, slipping through wormholes, using coordinates no alien ever knew existed. They had mapped the galaxy in ways no one imagined. For decades, while others fought for seats in the Council chamber, humanity had been building routes beneath the routes, passages hidden in gravitational dead zones, tunnels through black space that no scanner could see. And now, those passages were alive with movement. Freighters carried weapons under coded silence. Dreadnoughts moved with cloaked escort ships. Fighters trained in simulated battles deep inside asteroid belts where no signal could escape. Alien smugglers started reporting disappearances. Entire convoys gone, not raided, not destroyed, just erased, leaving behind only empty static. Patrols were sent to investigate, but the moment they entered the black sectors, they never came back. The Council called these losses accidents. But soldiers began to whisper different words: war brewing. One night cycle, a Council border station in Sector R-57 picked up a strange ripple on its scanners. At first, they thought it was a solar flare, but then came the sound. A deep, low vibration that shook the station's hull, like something massive passing in the distance. The crew scrambled to scan, but before they could get a lock, everything went dark. The lights flickered back after 30 seconds, and the scanners showed nothing. But every sensor recorded it: the pulse of engines, the silence after. The message spread like wildfire through military channels. The Council sent scouts deeper into those sectors, and one by one those scouts vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, just silence. The aliens didn't realize they weren't looking at a scattered human force. They were looking at a sleeping beast awakening. On the human flagship, buried in the shadow of a binary star system, admirals gathered around a vast digital map that pulsed with red veins of movement. Their formations were no longer defensive, they were strategic, coordinated, surgical. "They don't see us," the admiral said quietly, tracing her fingers across the map. "They still think we're gone." A second officer leaned forward. "By the time they do see us, they'll already be surrounded." There was no laughter in the room, no shouting, no need for speeches. Every officer in that room carried the same fire, the fire that had been lit the moment the Council betrayed them. In the core worlds, Council leaders slept easy in their towers, convinced they had secured peace. But beneath their comfortable ignorance, entire fleets moved through black space, growing stronger every day. The rumors grew louder, from border stations to smugglers' dens to mercenary bars. "They're coming back," someone whispered. "They never left," another replied. And though no one could prove it, every species that had once turned their backs on humanity felt the same chill run down their spine at night. The whispers weren't the sound of weakness. They were the echoes of a storm forming beyond the edge of their sight. A storm that was moving closer with every silent hour. Humanity wasn't broken. Humanity was waiting. And the galaxy had no idea that by the time it finally understood those whispers, the war would already be at its door. The night cycle over the galactic core began like any other. The cities below shining with their usual golden glow, council patrol fleets moving lazily through the trade lanes, alien diplomats toasting over their so-called victory, the betrayal of humanity already fading from their speeches like old news, but in the silence between those blinking stars, something stirred, something cold, something human, the kind of quiet movement that doesn't announce itself, it strikes. In one small outpost orbiting the neutral zone, a technician monitoring deep space frequencies frowned at his console. He tapped it once, twice, the signal was clear, too clear. A single word came through the encrypted channel, soft, calm, human, war. Just one word. No signature, no coordinates, no demand. A heartbeat later, the entire station went dark. Across dozens of council worlds, at the exact same moment, every military satellite, every diplomatic comm, every secured channel picked up that same message in perfect synchronization, war. The word echoed like thunder through their systems, burned into their screens like a scar. Every alien officer who saw it felt something crawl up their spine. Not because it was loud, but because it was so quiet, so certain, like a verdict already decided. Council leaders rushed into war rooms, shouting for status reports, demanding origins. But there were none. The message had come from everywhere and nowhere, wrapped in encryption the council couldn't trace. On the bridge of the human flagship, deep beyond the rim, the admiral stood still, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the map light up with the silent echo of their message. Her officers moved like shadows around her. No noise, no confusion. This wasn't chaos. This was execution. Message confirmed across all sectors, an officer whispered. The admiral's lips curved just slightly, not into a smile, but into something colder. Then it begins, she replied, her voice like steel sliding out of its sheath. The first strike came less than an hour after the message. In Sector R-57, a council surveillance array that had been watching the void for years suddenly blinked out of existence. Not destroyed with messy explosions, but erased with surgical precision. The operators never had a chance to scream. In Sector J-09, an orbital shipyard was swallowed in fire as cloaked human warships decloaked like beasts emerging from deep water, their railguns firing in a synchronized pattern that cut through steel like paper. In Sector T-11, the Council's border listening post received a proximity alert, and by the time the commander turned his head toward the window, all he saw was a black shape blotting out the stars. A second later, they were gone. The council chamber was chaos. Alarms blared through the golden halls. Diplomats screamed over one another, demanding to know who had attacked, but they already knew. "It's them," one alien officer whispered. "Humans." The supreme speaker slammed a clawed hand against the table. "Impossible." It hissed, but the fear in its voice betrayed the lie. The aliens had believed that exile had broken humanity, that silence meant weakness, but silence had only given humanity time to sharpen their knives. Meanwhile, in the dark, massive human dreadnoughts prowled like wolves in a galaxy that had once mocked them. Their engines silent, their hulls black, their weapons precise. The council fleet scrambled to respond, but every time they arrived, they found nothing. No wreckage, no trails, just cold void. Humanity wasn't just striking, they were erasing. One by one, council installations disappeared like candles snuffed out in the dark. Reports flooded into the council military command. Sector R-57 is gone. We lost communication with J-09. No response from T-11. The officers stuttered over their words, struggling to believe what they were saying. The council had spent decades believing they controlled the stars, but they had never prepared for a human war that didn't start with speeches or declarations. Started with one word. Back on the human flagship, the admiral watched the red markers spread across the map like drops of ink on paper. Her officers reported strike after strike with quiet efficiency. Phase 1 completed, one of them said. She nodded once, no celebration, no cheers. This wasn't revenge shouted at the sky. This was justice written in silence. Send Phase 2, she ordered. Across the galaxy, More human fleets shifted into position, years of hidden infrastructure roaring to life in the void. The war they had prepared for had just been set free. In the council chamber, the speaker demanded, "Who gave the order?" A trembling officer answered, "No one. They didn't ask. They told us." Those words struck harder than any weapon. The humans weren't asking for negotiations. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They weren't even asking for war. They had already decided. Alien leaders who once laughed at human defiance sat in silence, their faces pale, because in that one quiet word, they heard something older than the council, something the galaxy had tried to forget: human wrath. And as the golden city above the council world shone under its fake peace, fleets were burning at its borders, stations were falling without a trace, and a single message repeated through the dark like a heartbeat: war. The betrayal that the council thought would end humanity had only awakened something the stars would never forget. The storm had begun, and there was no turning it back. The galaxy's borders burned in silence, not with chaos, not with messy rebellion, but with surgical precision, every attack timed, every strike planned, every move like the hand of a hunter closing around its prey. The council fleets tried to scatter in response, but they were too slow. They had grown soft behind their golden walls, used to meetings and treaties, not real war, not human war, the kind of war that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't wait for approval, the kind of war that strikes like lightning in the dark and is gone before the scream reaches the air. In Sector V-42, the Council's largest weapons depot exploded in a brilliant flash, the kind that split the void apart. No warning, no fleet, no battle, just an instant, a roar, a blaze, and nothing left but drifting ash. 3 sectors away, a convoy of alien warships found themselves surrounded by shadows. Scanners picked up nothing, no heat, no energy signatures, just empty space, until the lights went out one by one, and the black shapes of human dreadnoughts slid into view like leviathans rising from a silent ocean. They moved with a grace no council fleet had ever seen, their hulls built for war, their engines whispering through the void, and when they opened fire, the soundless impact ripped through steel. Like glass, one ship after another went dark. Their crews never even had time to send a distress signal. Their command channels filled only with static and breathing, then silence. The Council military command was drowning in panic. Reports came in faster than they could even read. Weapons depot gone, fleet lost contact, border stations silent, and with every new message, the map on the war table bled red, sector after sector lighting up like dying stars. The Supreme Speaker slammed its claws into the table, screaming for answers. Where are they? But no one could answer, because the humans were nowhere and everywhere at the same time. One general stuttered, "They're not fighting like before. They're hunting us." And that was the truth. While the council scrambled, the humans moved deeper, fleets dividing and reforming like smoke in the dark. No single front, no predictable pattern. Every strike was designed to break something the council depended on. Fuel stations, communication hubs, supply routes, shipyards, nothing flashy. No grand battles yet, just strikes that bled them dry, quiet and fast. The council tried to regroup their fleets around the core worlds. But by the time they formed their defenses, entire supply chains had collapsed, hundreds of stations burned, colonies silenced. On the human flagship, the admiral stood with hands behind her back, her eyes fixed on the holomap that bloomed red lines like veins across the galaxy. Every point of light was another council asset gone, another weakness revealed. Their fleets are folding inward. An officer reported, voice calm, steady, like they'd already expected this. The admiral nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Let them run. Let them choke themselves." Humanity had waited decades for this, building weapons in secret, designing tactics not for defense, but for the one moment they would rise. This was that moment. In a council stronghold on planet Vecra, the alarms rang like bells of doom as black shapes fell through the clouds. No announcements, no threats, just the sudden roar of engines and the fire of railguns tearing through defense towers. Alien soldiers tried to scramble, but human drop pods landed like thunder, opening in unison. Soldiers stepping out in silence with black armor and glowing visors. Their movements coordinated, ruthless, unstoppable. The stronghold fell in less than 17 minutes. Council forces tried to call for reinforcements, but their comms were already gone. Cut at the source by a strike they hadn't even detected. The Supreme Speaker's voice shook as it addressed the council chamber. They're taking sectors faster than we can respond. But everyone already knew. Their faces pale. Their eyes darting like prey cornered in a shrinking cage. We underestimated them, one alien general whispered. We thought exile would break them. A senator slammed his fist. They built a war machine while we were celebrating their defeat. And no one could deny it. Every planet that had mocked humanity, every race that had turned its back, now whispered their name with dread. Because the council wasn't fighting a rebellion. It was facing a storm forged in silence. A war crafted by a species that never forgot betrayal. Humanity wasn't conquering for glory. They were dismantling the council piece by piece, methodical, patient, cold. In orbit above a burning shipyard, a human captain stood on the deck of a dreadnought, watching the flames crawl across the alien metal below. His voice carried over the calm like quiet thunder. No mercy, no warnings. They wanted us erased. Now they'll remember us forever. And across the stars, human ships vanished back into the dark before the next strike, leaving behind only ruins and fear. The council thought they could contain the damage, thought they could regroup. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't just a war of ships and guns. It was a war of memory, of betrayal answered. Humanity had unleashed its fury, and the galaxy was just beginning to understand what it meant to betray them. The Council's proud fleets were no longer fleets. They were fragments scattered across the stars, shattered wings of empires that once boasted about their strength. Their polished golden ships now drifting broken through the void like useless relics. What began as whispers and shadows had now turned into a storm ripping through their borders with terrifying precision. Entire systems that had once flown the banners of the Council now burned with the cold fire of human strikes. Nothing loud, nothing messy. Just the kind of clean destruction that comes when your enemy knows exactly where you are weakest. Council war rooms overflowed with panic. Maps bled red. Sectors blinked out like dying lights. One by one, the network that once bound their power together was being cut apart with surgical cruelty. Alien generals shouted at one another, their voices cracking over the calm. We need to defend the core worlds. We have no fleets left to move. Where are the reinforcements? But there were none. The humans had moved too fast, too quietly, too intelligently. For every fleet the Council tried to gather, 2 more outposts were wiped out before they even launched. Supply convoys vanished mid-transit, communication relays fell silent, orbital defense stations were reduced to cold debris fields. Even their own spies whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. The humans are everywhere. On the bridge of the human flagship, the Admiral watched the holomap with a face carved from steel, her voice low, steady, cutting through the air like a blade. Phase 2 complete, she said, and her officers nodded without a sound. The map showed their fleets positioned around the core like wolves circling a wounded beast. The once untouchable Council now isolated, suffocating inside its own walls. They're folding inward, one officer whispered. Exactly where we want them, she replied. The Council had forced humanity into the shadows, and now those same shadows had become their cage. The Council chamber, once filled with smug laughter and polished speeches, now shook with alarms and the scent of fear. The Supreme Speaker slammed its claw against the table, its composure finally cracking. They were supposed to be broken? It screamed, but no one answered, because everyone in that room knew what they had done, and now they were paying for it. A general from the Vrak Dominion shouted. They're not fighting like a Council fleet. They're fighting like predators. Another hissed. We gave them time. That was our mistake. Every word spoken in that room was a confession they didn't want to make. Humanity wasn't coming to negotiate. They weren't coming to talk about borders or treaties. They had already decided. Their fleets didn't march in proud formations. They moved like shadows, striking and vanishing, striking again, leaving nothing but broken stations, darkened skies, and terrified survivors who spoke of black ships and silent soldiers. The alien populations began to panic as news spread faster than any official message. Colonies that had once laughed at humans now barricaded their cities. whispering stories about fleets that moved without sound and soldiers who didn't speak. One by one, alien governors begged the council for protection, but no help came. The core fleets were trapped defending their own worlds, too afraid to stretch their lines, too desperate to cover their crumbling empire. Human forces moved through the outer ring of the galaxy like fire through dry fields, and what the aliens didn't understand was that this was not the peak of human strength. This was just the beginning of their true war. In orbit above a dying world in Sector 72, human warships surrounded a council fleet 3 times their number. The council commander sent a desperate broadcast, demanding surrender from the humans, trying to sound powerful. But the humans didn't reply. No speeches, no threats, only movement. When their guns fired, they didn't just destroy ships. They shattered every illusion of council superiority that had existed for centuries. The battle lasted 9 minutes. The council fleet was gone. Back in the council chamber, the speaker finally leaned back, its crystal eyes wide and trembling. "We should have never betrayed them," it whispered, the room going silent at those words. Some tried to speak of peace talks, of offers, but deep down they knew it was far too late. Humans didn't come for talks. They came to finish what Betrayal had started. On the human flagship, the Admiral watched the last major border sector fall, her officers reporting each victory with quiet discipline. No celebration, no noise, because for them this wasn't glory. It was justice, long delayed, now collected in full. "We take the core next," she said, and her voice carried across the fleet like thunder in the void. Every soldier on every ship knew what that meant. This was not just about revenge. This was about making sure no one would ever dare betray humanity again. And as the fleets aligned, black ships drifting like silent giants in the dark, the galaxy held its breath. The council was collapsing. Humanity was closing in. And there was nothing left to stop them. The core worlds had always believed themselves untouchable, wrapped in fleets of gold and guarded by laws that bent entire systems to their will. But that night, the sky above them turned black, the stars vanished behind the silhouettes of human warships, massive and silent, drifting through the void like a wall of judgment. The council had spent years laughing, celebrating, looking down at humanity as if it were a fading ember. But now they stared up at the night and saw that ember had become a storm that didn't need speeches, didn't need mercy, it only needed one word: war. In the council chamber, alarms wailed through the golden halls, red lights flashing across carved marble floors. The supreme speaker sat frozen, its clawed hands digging into the table, its voice shaking as it asked the same question it had whispered for weeks. "Where are they now?" The answer finally came from a trembling officer. "They're here." The orbital defense grid activated with a shriek of energy, hundreds of golden ships rising to form a shield above the council homeworld. But they weren't facing pirates. They weren't facing some ragtag rebellion. They were facing a human fleet that had been forged in silence, sharpened by betrayal, fed by rage. A fleet built not to intimidate but to erase. The human dreadnoughts emerged from the shadow side of the system in perfect formation, their hulls black as the void itself, their engines silent, their lines like blades, and as they moved into position, their lights came on. Not bright, not loud, but in a single synchronized pulse that turned the night sky into something the council would never forget. The council fleets opened fire first, panicked, their golden beams streaking through space like desperate screams. But the human ships didn't scatter. They didn't flinch. Their shields lit up with cold blue light, absorbing the assault like water over stone. And when they finally answered, they didn't roar. They whispered destruction, railguns firing with the cold precision of a blade drawn across a throat. One blast tore through 3 council cruisers at once, splitting them open like paper, their fireball lighting the black like a funeral pyre. The second volley hit the orbital defenses, and in less than 8 minutes, what had taken the council centuries to build burned and broke into drifting fragments. Panic spread across the core cities, alien citizens pouring into the streets, looking up at the skies that had always promised safety and seeing instead the dark outlines of human war. The council chamber shook with the impact of orbital strikes hitting distant shipyards, the floor beneath their feet rumbling like an animal growling before the kill. The supreme speaker screamed orders to retreat, to regroup, but the communications were already dead. The humans had severed every line, every signal, every escape route. Their ships controlled the void completely. On the bridge of the human flagship, the admiral stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the burning core, no emotion in her face, only focus. Phase 3 initiated, an officer said, his voice steady. All targets are locked. She nodded once. Execute. Across the fleet, missiles launched in synchronized silence, streaking toward orbital towers, military bastions, power grids, everything that had once made the Council untouchable, collapsing like a kingdom built on sand. Inside the chamber, the speaker's voice cracked. Why won't they speak? Why won't they talk? No one answered. The humans weren't speaking because they didn't have to. Their silence was the answer. For years the Council had spoken down to them, mocked them, ruled over them. Now humanity spoke in the only language the galaxy would never forget: power. The walls of the chamber trembled as a shockwave from the upper city reached them, and delegates began to scream, some shouting for mercy, some shouting for surrender, but the word mercy didn't exist here anymore. Human troops landed like ghosts, their dropships gliding through burning skies without sirens, their boots striking the marble streets of the Council capital with perfect rhythm, black armored soldiers moving like one living thing. The city guards tried to resist, but resistance lasted seconds. Precision fire cut through their lines like a scythe through dry grass. The golden spires of the Council city, once symbols of their power, cracked and fell, their light smothered by the cold smoke of human vengeance. The Supreme Speaker was dragged out of the chamber's golden doors not by its guards, but by silence. The humans entered without breaking formation, their boots echoing through the hall, black visors reflecting the fire outside. Not one of them raised their voice. Not one of them needed to. The speaker stared up at the admiral who stepped through the ruined entrance like a storm made flesh, her presence colder than the steel around her. You can't, the speaker stammered. This is the Council. This is the core. We're untouchable. She looked down at it, her face still, unreadable. The weight of years of betrayal reflected in her eyes. Not anymore, she said softly. The Council was overrun in a single night. Its fleets shattered, its banners burned, its leaders captured or fled into the darkness, their cries swallowed by the silence they had once mocked. Across the galaxy, screens flickered to life as humanity's emblem appeared over every Council channel. No speeches, no demands, no politics. Just the image of the fleet hanging over the core like a shadow the galaxy would never escape. For the first time in centuries, the Council world was silent, truly silent. No orders, no control, no arrogance. Only the sound of human boots walking across the same marble floor they had once been forced to stand beneath. The admiral stepped onto the central platform of the chamber, looked around at the faces of those who once betrayed her people, and whispered a single line into the calm and final, "Never again." Outside, the sky burned golden and red as the Council flag was torn down and replaced by a black banner, its edges fluttering in the hot wind of a world that had just learned what happens when humanity is betrayed. And somewhere in that silence, across the galaxy, every empire that had once laughed at Earth went quiet, because they finally understood the humans were not just survivors. They were the storm that follows betrayal.